Hello, welcome to today's Vendor Spotlight. My name's Lee Biggendon. I'm the Chief Commercial Officer and co-founder of Nephos Technologies. Joined today by Keith Costigan, Senior Solutions Consultant at Manta. Welcome, Keith. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Lee. Pleasure to be here.
Thank you. Now, before we get into it, just a quick introduction into Nephos as an organisation. But essentially, we're a data services integrator working with kind of UK and global customers of all different shapes and sizes across a number of different disciplines, all focused on data. So whether that's high performance data infrastructure, whether it's data governance, privacy, risk, compliance, and also data services more broadly. We're working with our customers to support them through our professional services team who help develop strategy, develop program roadmaps, that kind of thing, all the way through to implementation and fully managed services. The reason we're here today is that, and with our partners at Manta, is that the guys at Manta are one of our strategic partners, and we wanted to take the opportunity to introduce them and also have Keith discuss really, what their position in the market is, how they're helping customers to overcome some of their data challenges within that space. Without further ado, as they say, thanks again, Keith, for joining us. As a starting point, could you introduce yourself and Manta for us, please, Keith?
Yeah, absolutely, Lee. So here at Manta, what we have as an offering or as a proposition is what we describe as a unified lineage platform. As a platform, essentially what we do is we scan database engines, ETL, report environments, and more. And we essentially derive the associated lineage for those particular systems in a way that gives visibility to the organizations in terms of what they have as data assets, and also how data flows from source systems to target systems within their broader ecosystem. And when you have visibility of what you have in terms of data assets and how that data is flowing inside of the organization, then you're in a better position to try and leverage what it is you have in terms of data as an asset. So I would say that's a high-level summary of what we do. How we actually do that is, I mentioned, we connect to various systems. And we are what I would describe as lineage by parsing. So we will connect to those systems. We will extract objects that are of interest, such as, for example, DDL, code, and so on and so forth. And we will analyze the code that we extract and essentially reverse engineer that code to try and understand how data is moving as specified in that code. And then once we've done that analysis and we understand how data is moving, essentially what we do is we create a representation of the relationships between various objects in the ecosystem. They could be different systems, for example, the relationship between a database or an ETL environment. And we persist those relationships in a graph database on top of which you can create visualizations of those relationships and how data flows right down to the actual column level.
Yeah, from our perspective, I guess one of the things that drew us to Manta, and you touched on it there, a lot of our customers or a lot of organizations are or struggle to get that visualization piece, right? They kind of know what they've got, but it's not always accurate. Or we were chatting with an investment bank recently, and they have a large problem around the fact that they've got some really older homegrown applications and they don't understand the pipeline. Which has a knock-on impact in all sorts of areas. I think from our perspective, like the world over, everyone's trying to get more value from the data, right? That's not a surprise to anyone. But in order to do that, they have to trust in it. And that trust comes from its quality, generally speaking. But to ensure the quality, you need to understand the provenance, right? You need to understand that pipeline. Is that, I suppose, when you're working with customers, where do you see the key use cases playing? Because to me, that's definitely one of them, that kind of understanding data pipeline, fixing it faster, or working out where it's broken faster. But also we see some customers that are very interested in it as part of things like regulatory reporting or financial reporting. for things like BCBS 239 as an example. Can you just talk a little bit for us around those sorts of use cases and where Manta sits and supports those things for us?
Yeah, absolutely. So we would address three predominant use cases, and you've already touched on some of them, or inferred to some of those use cases. So you're talking specifically about data governance, which is the predominant use case that we are speaking to most existing and prospective customers about on a daily basis. Data migration is another use case that we talk to a lot and talk about a lot with prospective customers. And indeed, DevOps, day-to-day management of the data environment, being able to surface data to users when and where required in a way that ensures that what's being surfaced is contextually correct and that data is fit for purpose. And so you referenced that point in regard to data governance. If you have regulatory obligations, for example, and you are surfacing data elements to a particular report for both internal and indeed perhaps even external stakeholders, depending on what the compliance is specific to under the law, for example, you have to have that confidence in the data. You have to understand where that data is originated from. That's one of the things that we help organizations understand. So we help them not just visualize, but what's doubly important is the ability to have that additional context. So it's good to see the movement, but a contextual understanding of what's happening to that data as it's in movement is also important. So has it undergone any transformations? When we're eventually at the point where we're surfacing that data inside of a regulatory report, can we be confident that what we've surfaced is what we believe it to be and it is fit for purpose? And we can be satisfied and confident that what we're presenting to these third-party stakeholders, whether they're internal or external, basically represents what we say it represents. So yeah, you're essentially, if you're to summarize that type of use case, it's about having the visibility and then also the context that eventually leads to the level of confidence that you can have in that data, so you can use it for the purpose that it's designed to be used for. Now, hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it makes total most sense to me. I think it's one of those things, isn't it, where I suppose there's two sides to it. If the users don't trust the data, or if the output that they're getting from the data is incorrect or inaccurate, one obviously there's possibly a quality issue, which is one piece, but also we see more and more organizations that are using third-party data, or they're using data from various different sources within the business. And actually, one of the things really commonly that they seem to struggle with is understanding where that data has changed as it moves through the business, and actually being able to pinpoint where that problem is or where it's changed, or we've got a field in a database table and at this point in time it's called Dave's table column, and at this point in time it's called Steve's table column, and somewhere in between it's changed, but people don't always know that change has occurred or the impact that it's going to have. So being able to identify that kind of pipeline challenge and resolve it faster is a massive issue for a lot of customers that we speak to. So I think that's a critical piece. You mentioned the cloud migration bit, which always interests me, in as much as, and I know, I'm not sure if it was yourself that I was talking to about this previously, but this idea of being able to identify what you've got, what the pipeline is, so when you are migrating workloads, actually you're doing it properly. You've got the full picture, right? Is that a common case for you guys that you've worked to?
It is a common case, and there's one case that comes to mind in particular, and that would be the Bank of Montreal, who are an existing customer of ours. So they had, for example, a data migration project, and their team basically used Manta to find something like 1,200 downstream dependencies from, I think it was something like 13,000 columns. Without Manta, I believe they calculated that it would have taken them up to 15 minutes per column to be able to accurately trace the dependencies back. But utilizing Manta and utilizing Manta's automated capabilities, it instead took them 7 hours. So a project that would have potentially taken months, essentially they were able to do the mapping that they needed to facilitate within a matter of hours as opposed to potentially weeks.
Yeah.
And that's the challenge. How do you actually map these dependencies without a capability that's offered by the likes of a unified lineage platform like Manta? It becomes quite a manual process. And it's also difficult as well to plan around your migration efforts. If you don't have visibility of those dependencies, you're going to encounter those dependencies as part of your migration efforts. And that tends to slow you down and throws up obstacles that you didn't necessarily anticipate at the beginning. And now, of course, that costs you time and then ultimately money as a result.
Yeah, and we've seen it historically with kind of general cloud migrations as an example, where I think people went into it thinking, oh, we could just move this application, or we could just move this thing. We don't have to move everything, but actually you have to move a cluster. You can't just move one thing. It's all interconnected, generally speaking. So it's going into that sort of program without the visibility is almost a little bit destined to failure, really. And you touched on something there, which I'd like to pick on a little bit. In terms, so how are organizations that you're talking to, how do they do this without a tool, whether it's Manta, whether it's someone else, whatever it might be?
Yeah, it's a great question. And the answer is actually interesting and potentially surprising. You might expect them to try and map their environments with some level of manual intervention. And we do see that from time to time. But you would be surprised at how many organizations just simply hold their hands up and say, we're not going to try this at this particular point in time. Unless it's critical and they really have to do it as part of some kind of regulatory obligation, oftentimes they just don't do it. And it's understandable in some respect. If it's not a critical data flow at that particular juncture, then you might understand why they might not want to undertake the task, because they lack the resources to do it, they lack the people to do it, and just the time and the cost associated with the manual mapping of those flows is just prohibitive. So that's generally what we see. They'll either try and some kind of manual intervention, or they won't do anything, which is.
And I suppose it's crazy, really, when you think about it. But I suppose when you look at, if you take that Bank of Montreal example, to manually do that or run that program, the cost in just man hours alone, potentially that stops a project from a budget overrun perspective, from a timing perspective, all of those things. You can't actually do it. And it sounds like that's potentially quite a common issue for people. Now, Manta aren't the only game in town. I don't think any of us sit here and say that. There are, what is it they say with the BBC, other tools are available. But I guess from your perspective, what makes Manta unique? What's the secret sauce that kind of sets Manta apart from some of the rest of the approaches out there?
Yeah, so it's that automated capability. So that ability to be able to connect to whatever that particular system is, extract the objects in an automated fashion, analyze what we extract, and then basically place you in a position that you can visualize the relationships that we have managed to extract from those particular objects. So that's the key differentiator for us as an organization. But it's also the breadth of technologies that we support. So today we have connectors for over 50 different technologies. So we have the ability to derive not just intra-system movement. So we also support cross-technology lineage. So it's both intra and inter-system movement of data right down to the column level, which is another key differentiator. So we can show you column level movement from the origination point to the target system. And as I mentioned previously, it's not just about the visibility, it's all about the contextual understanding of what types of changes are happening within that pipeline to the data, which is quite powerful. So we would, for example, within the user interface, you were able to surface store procedure code, for example. We also have the ability to tag data elements. So you touched on briefly the points about changes in data, changes to tables, perhaps, changes to column names, etc. If you had, for example, a situation where you have sensitive data, and maybe that sensitive data sits within a table, that table name is changed, and now that's no longer recognizable as sensitive, or it's no longer recognized as a table that's holding sensitive data, we have the ability to be able to tag sensitive data so that you can follow that through the actual pipeline from its origination point to wherever it's being surfaced, perhaps in a report or something of that nature. So we have the ability to tag data elements that provide that additional context that help in your understanding of how that data is flowing and whether or not, for example, if it's sensitive data, it should be surfaced in a particular report to a particular user group or perhaps not. So it's really all about, again, it comes back to that visibility and understanding in that context. So you can leverage the data in a manner that you can essentially extract most value from it.
Yeah, and I think one of the other things that drew us to Manta, everything that you said in terms of, I guess I'd probably categorize that as breadth and depth. But also one of the other things that was important to us as a partner was the ability to leverage Manta in conjunction with other things. So whether that's Big ID, Calibra, Elation, whatever it might be, to join that capability in with other technology stacks from a governance perspective as well. So that was quite important to us, for sure. I think we're running close to time. As a final closing point, if you like, final closing piece, if you could give the audience maybe one or two pieces of advice where if you were embarking on this sort of project, what advice would you give to help deliver a successful outcome for it?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of things to think about, and you raised the point about data catalogs and our ability to push lineage into data catalogs, but yet you'd be surprised at the amount of organizations that embark on data catalog type projects without firstly understanding what they have in terms of data assets that they could register in that data catalog. So first things first, understand what you have within your environment, and that's where we can help. We help you essentially look inside your ecosystem, understand what data assets you have and how that data is actually flowing through the various pipelines. So that's the starting point. Once you understand what you have and how data is flowing, then get a good partner. Get somebody who knows how to leverage data strategy, and that of course lends itself to Nephos and your strengths as an organization. So they're the first two things. Gain that visibility, firstly, of how data is flowing through your various pipelines, how it's being leveraged, and then subsequently get yourself a good partner to understand how you could further leverage what you have once you gain that understanding to essentially gain competitive advantage or address any regulatory obligations that you might have as an organization. I think in summary, those 2 points are pertinent.
Yeah, thank you. And I think the other thing that really springs to mind, we see this across every walk of the governance stack, if you like, is that kind of time to value piece where you can't try and do everything all at once. You have to start with the most valuable and the things that are going to drive the most value for the organization, and not try and boil the ocean with a giant program that it's never going to get off the ground because it's too complex and it's too unwieldy and you're trying to do too much at the same time. So I think that for me is one of the other pieces that definitely plays into that. So I guess that kind of brings us to time. Big thank you for joining us today, Keith. Thanks for sharing your insight and giving us that sort of quick background into Manta. Hopefully it's useful for the listener, but thanks for joining us.
Pleasure, Lee. Thanks very much for having us.
No worries. And I guess if anyone would like to learn more about either Nephos or Manta, you can visit us at nephostechnologies.com or reach out to your account management or CSM team. And likewise, if you'd like to learn more about the Manta platform, then you can visit the team at getmanta.com. It's changed, isn't it? .io.
It is changed to www.manta.io.
Manta.io. There you go. I can't keep up with marketing changes, clearly. But yeah, big thanks to Keith and thanks for listening.